Okay, let's get going. Thank you so much for joining us today, Arthi, and we're super excited to hear you out.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, so would you want to start out, say, by, sharing your journey? Say, I know you have like a background in software engineering, and then you moved into UX, and then, from your undergrad to coming to Pratt, and then like your work experiences right now. If you could just like take us through your journey of how this has happened, and then all the insights that you've learned from the industry, how you've moved across these different industries as well.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. Hi everyone, I'm Arthi. I guess for starters, introduction. Like Roshni said, my background formally by education is actually in computer science, and I also did a degree in art history. So a bit of a mixed background, but the natural path forward from that undergrad degree was to work in software engineering. And it was also one of the most fruitful and I guess well-paid careers at that time. But I quickly learned that more than I enjoyed doing development, I enjoyed designing solutions. And it was convenient for me at the time working in government R&D because there are very few designers in that industry. And most of the software engineers end up doing full stack development. So they do end to end, back end, and also like how the front end is implemented in a lot of these applications. So I learned that this front end piece, that's what I enjoy the most, understanding what users need and how it needs to be displayed to them. And it was also a very high pressure type of environment that I was working in where users needs need to be met to the utmost extreme, or else it could lead to like very big detriments, given that it's the, Air Force and Department of Defense. They are the people who are using these applications. So, anyways, I made a transition after that career into being a UX engineer, which I don't really think is a commonly found career anymore. But basically, they're developers who focus on the front end and also do a bit of design and understanding needs, but it's not the formal design process that we see in UX careers right now. So I did that in e-commerce, sorry, not e-commerce, also government R&D for a little bit before formally transitioning into a full design role. And I think it's the case for a lot of people within my cohort who joined the UX industry that we don't come from a design background formally. So that transition comes from any field, and learning how to do UX at that time was pretty much all self-learning, unless you happen to do an HCI master's, which I only did after the fact. Most of my learning at that time was through LinkedIn courses, online courses, anything that was available to teach me what is the UX research process and the actual UX design process. Um, Most of it was easily learnable online at that time, but getting practical experience is the hard thing. So I think I was very fortunate to get a company to actually hire me with a portfolio full of fake projects, just things I made up, and experience that was based off of things I learned online. But now the like landscape is very different, where they're expecting you to have like real on the ground experience, delivering products to people or real world problems that somebody has asked you to design for. Yeah, so I've been in design since then for quite a while, and I've had the, I guess, pleasure of working in both e-commerce UX and now in finance UX. And I'm currently working at Bloomberg. And this, I think, has been one of the more challenging careers that I've entered. And it comes with any industry that you're working in. You have to learn not just the UX process, but also the industry's whatever technicalities. If you're working in, I don't know, like chemicals or pharmaceuticals UX, you need to learn a bit of that in order to design for it. So for me, it was starting from zero. I knew nothing about finance before going into, heads first into derivatives designing for Bloomberg. But we could probably talk about it later, what I'm doing exactly at Bloomberg. But that is a brief overview.
Oh, I think that's like a wonderful career progression, like from,
Yeah.
software to also dabbing into so many different industries. So, if you could maybe just like touch brief into like, what you did at Pratt, the kind of courses you took, maybe, that kind of helped you shape, your direction as a designer more strongly. Like how did that help with that whole base? And then we could probably get into your what you're doing at Bloomberg currently. Like, how did you develop, say, that domain specific skill set that you required at Bloomberg, and also say the kind of different stakeholders you have to deal with on a daily basis, what your job entails. So if you could do that.
Yeah. Okay, one by one. So let's start with your first question was around, sorry, say it again.
Yeah, this is the first question is around, say, at Pratt, like,
Yeah,
you
Pratt.
did
Okay,
this, yeah, at
coursework.
Pratt, yeah. Well, how
Okay.
did that go about? Yeah.
Definitely. So I was working as a UX engineer when I joined the program, the IXD program at Pratt, and that was peak COVID. So my first semester was actually fully virtual, but all of the courses that I took there were foundational around the design process and research. And I think many of the courses that I took, I very purposefully took courses that I knew were going to produce portfolio projects because the work that I was doing at Blue Apron at the time, while I could create work for my portfolio, what I really needed on the books was something that felt end-to-end design process. Like I'm starting from scratch, understanding a problem and bringing that all the way to the end to fruition and potentially delivering it to a client, which a lot of the courses at Pratt actually allow you to do. Um, the courses that work specifically with the DX Center and get you real life clients, whether that's nonprofit or, any type of organization, I think those are the most valuable courses because the work really feels like hands-on and I'm solving a real problem. And what's even better about it is that employers within the interview scene, they feel like this is real work. They don't feel like it's a college project because you end up talking about here's how my meetings with the client, that organization went. Here's how the end result was, and here was their feedback. And I think that's really valuable in those settings. Um, Okay, so the next question was around industry knowledge, right? Knowledge.
Yes, like about you just like your transition to Bloomberg, and then like, how you got into like, say, the finance space, like you were mentioning, being a software engineer and then the UX designer, and then getting that finance background and working as a senior interaction designer now. How did that process go about, and how does that look like your work on a day-to-day basis?
So I think actually getting my foot into the door at Bloomberg was kind of kismet and kind of related to Pratt. Well, actually very related to Pratt. My first manager at Bloomberg actually came to Pratt to do a guest talk, a guest lecture in one of my classes. I think it was the Projects for IXD course, but I can't remember exactly. But at the end of his talk, he mentioned that he was recruiting for Bloomberg. I reached out, despite the fact that I knew that they were hiring people who were senior. I kind of pitched myself saying, look, I don't have all of the years of experience you're expecting, but I have worked with real clients. I am currently in a UX tangential role, even though it's not a full designer role, but here's my skill set. And he was very happy to push me into the interview process and see what I could produce. And in fact, many of the work that I showed during my portfolio review was from Pratt. So they were very happy to see that type of work and a very extensive research process, which most of the courses push you to do. So that boded very well for me. Then actually getting into Bloomberg and learning the domain, that was pretty tough for me. I'm not going to lie. There was a very big learning curve there. My first role within Bloomberg, I was working in listed derivatives, so trading options and futures. How do we help people, traders, actually understand the data that is coming in on a daily basis very frequently, high intensity and very high risk scenarios? How do we help them interpret large volumes of data and make financial decisions based off of it? This could be like hundreds of dollars or it could be millions of dollars that they're placing bets on. So I need to do my best to not only understand the subject matter so that I can convey to them what are they looking at. Second, I need to make the interfaces as simple and like straightforward as possible without giving users the feeling of FOMO. Because People in this industry, they're used to looking at all the data at once. They don't care. They don't want to miss out on any one number and feel like that contributed to a loss. But we all know that information overload is an issue. So how do I balance those two was the primary problem within my first role at Bloomberg. Learning the actual finance domain, a lot of it came from speaking with people within the company, and my stakeholders varied across not just product and engineering folks, but also people within sales and then actual clients. So how Bloomberg works today, it's almost the Bloomberg terminal, sorry, for anyone who doesn't know, it's this hardware software platform that all finance professionals use today. It's on a subscription basis. It comes with access to all of the data, finance data that Bloomberg basically pulls in, purchases, bundles together, and ships out to different types of clients. And whether you're an analyst or portfolio manager or trader, any of these roles, you would find Bloomberg to be the best place to go to view all of the data that you need at once. And some people actually conduct trades on it as well. You know how you as an individual might have a Fidelity or a Robinhood account. You do all of your analysis there, but real people who are trading with this as their career, they need much more sophistication in the applications that they use to do the analysis. So yes, my stakeholders included clients, and a lot of the learning came from actually going to their desks. Like I would go to JP Morgan, go to Bank of America, and sit with them at their desk, watch them using the terminal, and ask them questions to understand what are you trying to do and what is your end goal, things like that. Um, I ended up traveling a lot to do this learning because the industry varies per country, and derivatives are actually very big in Europe, and that was where a majority of my clientele was. So I would go and do that same type of desk research. I think they're called diary studies, um, in the European offices as well to understand what the heck do you need from me before I start designing for you. I don't want to solve a problem that might not be a real problem. Um, yes. Okay. So that was the question. The next one was, remind me.
Yeah, it's just about like, your role from when you started out until now, like, how has
Okay.
it changed? And then like,
Okay.
what you've learned throughout that whole process.
Okay, great. So this is actually, it's been a significant change,
Mhm.
the journey from when I began at Bloomberg. When I started, that was the role that I was doing, but now I'm actually Bloomberg's designer for AI products. So most of these are LLM-based products. We are primarily working on an assistant, which most of you probably know what that kind of experience would be like. But imagine having an AI assistant within the finance domain, helping you make financial decisions, but know that we cannot actually make recommendations because that's not going to be put us in a good spot. But the best we can do is help you do analysis at a fast pace, help you do research at a fast pace. Yeah, so that has been a very exciting journey for me, being at almost the cusp of this technology and the forefront of it within this domain, because one of the biggest issues within the finance domain is trust. People don't like to trust LLMs unless they know exactly where did you get these answers from. And when it's the case of like a lot of money at stake, people don't want to trust anything without, verifying first. I'm sure that is also a scenario for many other domains like healthcare, things like that. Imagine you ask an LLM, what do I do? This is my symptoms. It's going to be hard. Um, yes, so that has been the career journey right now. I'm happy to talk more about that role if there's any specific questions about it. Um, on a day-to-day basis, I work with a wide variety of stakeholders in this role as well. Product, engineering, data folks to understand quality, output, things like that. Also, we have researchers within Bloomberg. So let me actually formalize. My role is an interaction designer, and I think every company is calling it something different, but it's the product designer, same thing, UX designer, same thing. Essentially, what I handle is the process from taking stakeholder requirements and a stakeholder problem, validating that that problem is real, translating those requirements from user pain points, basically whatever our UX researchers output. And my involvement with their research process is also very heavy, defining what do we need to ask of clients and what do we need to understand, what do we need to validate, things like that. Taking those requirements and then turning them into journeys and also very low fidelity wireframes to do some really early concept validation, ideation, especially with these future looking products. What we're trying to understand is this the typical workflow that you want to work in? A similar solution doesn't exist on the market. So how do we quickly evaluate that this might work for you without falling behind on the technology curve? Because LLMs are changing every day. Yeah, so I do that iteration cycle, and then eventually I will get to a medium to high-ish fidelity design with my work. But at Bloomberg, we also have visual designers. So that's where the breakdown happens, where I don't handle any graphics or things like that. I'll basically hand over my medium fidelity designs to a visual designer, and then they will translate that into either our design system or creating new components, things like that. And every company has a different balance for how much of each of these roles do you do. I've been in positions where I've been the exclusive researcher. I've been in positions where I've done all the way up to highest fidelity design and things like that. But in this current role, I think my strong suit is in early problem definition and ideation. So I'm in a good position. But nowadays, most entry-level jobs expect you to do the whole gamut. So you have to do end to end, or at least know how to do it. Cool. Okay. Now ask me again. What's
Yeah,
the
I
question?
think actually to add on to that, I also wanted to understand I think this has been a big conversation in general everywhere. Do you use AI as a part of your process in, as a designer, as like a tool that's helping you out to be more efficient with stuff that you do? Or is that like something Bloomberg encourages, or like is that something you guys don't usually dabble with?
I
Especially
think,
considering the research to design framing that you have to do, which is like a very crucial part
yeah,
of the process.
I would say that it's very heavily used within the company, within almost every company, they're really encouraging people to use anything that's going to expedite your work process. And within my role specifically, most of my usage comes from understanding research and deriving insights and understanding user pain points. And that comes from my lack of full understanding of the domain. Like, I don't know every problem that an equity analyst is going to experience, for example. I don't understand their day-to-day problems to the whole extent. I can, at a cursory level, tell you what they might need, but every single issue that they encounter, I wouldn't be able to explain it. So I think that's really where the LLMs come in handy for me because I can really quickly come up with here are all of the potential scenarios that this type of user might encounter that I need to design for without spending the hours to question users and ask them things that might be straightforward for them. It's essentially like the Google research process that I would do is now, which was hours and hours, is now maybe shortened into a span of 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Um, with regards to design ideation, I'm not using too much of AI to do that, but I know a lot of people are. There's no discouragement towards it. In fact, it's encouraged if it's going to help you speed things up. I have dabbled in it, but I think for me, doing it by hand is often faster. The LMs also haven't reached the speed that I expect them to be at, so maybe in the time that it takes for it to generate one potential low fidelity screen, I could make five. So, yeah, I can see that becoming useful as things speed up in the future. But I do know from what I've heard from my colleagues and peers outside of Bloomberg, this is encouraged across the industry, like across the UX industry as a whole, to use these tools to expedite your process.
So, if you want to tell, say that one key learning or one key skill set that you have picked up or you think is the most important that any designer who's entering the industry now, should have throughout, based on your experience.
Mhm. Actually, I think this is an easy one, and the best thing to learn is to understand how to sell the designs you do. You
Mm,
have to understand why you designed something a specific way in order to sell that to your
mhm,
stakeholders.
mhm.
If I bring to the table three different designs for a problem that I was presented with by my product counterparts,
Yeah.
I have to be able to explain to them why these three solutions work and which of them work
Mhm.
the best. Because the question from the other side is always going to be, why did you do it this way? Why didn't you consider doing something else?
Mm,
So that's where a lot of the research that you do is going to come in, whether that be academic research or actual field research from clients.
mhm.
In fact, academic research is actually one of the more valuable ones there because a lot of the problems we're solving are not new. They've
Yeah.
been very well researched. The HCI community has done an amazing job of documenting everything that they research. So there is a paper somewhere explaining how best to design these things that you're trying to create. So bring those to the table, learn how to defend the things that you design. And that's also a very important interview skill. When you present that portfolio project, it's not just how pretty is the output, what font did you use, what color is it? It's why did you decide to put that thing in the top left corner rather than anywhere else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think that yeah, that's a great point actually. Would you say like you have to present, especially also like now, be it, I think it's a good segue into like the whole, job search and like, making a portfolio segment of this. So I would you also say somewhere like the whole translating into business metrics becomes very important, like going from, the research findings that you get, but then turning them into business metrics so that, your stakeholders understand exactly what you're trying to do and like mapping that. And how would you say you do that as a designer, especially because I think we don't think, say, in that whole business metrics POV because we think from very user needs or very qualitative POV.
Yeah, I think there's actually two parts that you need to educate your product counterparts on. The
Mm-hmm.
business metrics are very important, but that's actually their job to evaluate,
Mm-mm.
is this solution that we've created meeting those metrics? You
Mm-hmm.
can definitely be a part in helping them curate
Yeah.
those, but I think what they need to understand is here are the usage metrics that we need to understand. Here are the users' feedback and metrics that we need to keep track of in order to understand, are users satisfied with what we've produced?
Mm-hmm.
Not just is the business like meeting the requirements that they've set. Like the business requirements might be we gain this much attention or we make this much money from this product, but the user metrics might be fewer drop-offs and more satisfied responses to surveys, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to get both.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think almost as we come to the end of like, just both of us having this conversation and we can have everyone else pitch in all the questions that they have. If you have any tips, I think everyone's in the whole internship and job search phase right now. So any tips that you have with like, with just crafting portfolio, prepping for interviews, like, what are some lessons that you learned throughout this process when you
Yeah,
went through it?
actually. It's been a while since
Yeah.
I've been interviewing, but it's from what I remember, one of the most important things is the portfolio because getting past to that behavioral interview is often easy. It's
Mm-hmm.
just to understand, are you who you say you are and are you easy to talk to? But within the portfolio around, what's most important is having projects that you know really well how you executed your design process.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, what the company is looking for is not necessarily what designs did you create, it's how did you translate the problem that you encountered into a design process and produce a solution. Because what's going to translate to the company is what is this person's process that they can use at our company? Does it fit with how we work today? Is
Mm-hmm.
it missing anything that we think is very valuable? Like maybe you don't talk about research in your design process, but actually the company really emphasizes and puts value on research. That's going to be a major red flag for them. Or let's say you already know that X company does a lot of A/B testing
Mm-hmm.
and iteration. If you describe that as being part of your process, then that'll be a green flag for the company saying, great, this person already knows how to do something that we place a lot of value on. But either way, whether you know or not what the company is focused on, within their process, you have to be able to describe, here are the steps that I take. And a lot of portfolios have that like out of the box can step one, step two, step three, here's what I did. But you have to really try to introduce your nuance. Here's what makes what I did different from all of those like on the market portfolios. Mine
Mm.
is special because I brought this to the table, something like that. Um, yeah, that I think that's the major thing for portfolio reviews. Bring 2 to 3 projects max for what you want to share. I think most of the time you only go through 1 or 2. Be prepared for questions that are going to be around your process. So,
Mhm.
how did you do these things? Why did you do them? If there are any results that are missing from your case study, they might ask about that, like reactions to the product or stakeholder feedback. Those are very important. Throughout your process, do mention not only what you did, but how you worked with the people around you, because you're being hired onto a team. You're going to be working with other people. They're going to want to understand how you worked with your counterparts. Even if they're not designers, how did you work with the people giving you requirements or the people evaluating your performance? Um, yeah, I think those are the main things to focus on. Definitely, if you don't have them in your portfolio projects, include academic research in your research process because even your interviewers know you're not solving like brand new problems. Somebody has already solved these problems, so reference the solutions that we know work.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. It was super insightful. And now the floor is open for questions. You can either unmute or you can also put the questions on chat and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, don't be shy. Happy to answer anything.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Myra. So right now I am in my final semester and about to graduate. So I wonder like how do you see the roles of product designer, like interaction designer, UX UI designer involving in the age of AI? Is there specific skills you would recommend us to learn?
Definitely. So, like I mentioned before, the differentiation between those titles is very subject to each company. Sometimes product designers do everything, sometimes they do more business side of things, but it's going to really depend on the job description. When it comes to working with AI and being on that cutting edge, I think what's most important is getting a baseline understanding of how do these systems work. How does an LLM work today, and what are the types of different AI technologies that are on the market? Because not only are you designing something that is user-facing, you are designing something that the engineers are going to be developing. So you need to understand how do these systems generally work in order to design something that's optimal for both sides. Given that the technology changes on a daily basis, how is the engineer going to be able to work with that? Um, I think you don't need to be the expert in AI, right? You don't need to be the expert in any domain, really, other than design, but you need to have a baseline understanding of these are the inputs that LLMs take, and these are the outputs. This is how it produces a solution. This is why the wait time is so long. This is what the system is doing under the hood. And the way you'll benefit when you learn all these things is what does the user need at each of these stages? Because this is what the system is doing. How do we tell the user that? Like when you refresh your browser, how do you know that something is working? You see something on the screen, whether that's a loading dial or something, and that conveys to the user, okay, I need to wait because it's working on something. Similarly, on the LLM side, when you hit submit to your prompt, what is happening? It's not just a blank screen that shows up while it's producing a solution. What is happening that we can convey to the user? Things like that. And that I think that learning is actually relatively simple. You could go on YouTube, find videos to understand how do AI solutions like this work today. I'm specifically talking about LLMs because I think that's the majority of what people on the companies on the market are producing today, but there might be something more.
Got it, got it. Thank you so much. It's
Definitely,
really helpful.
definitely play with the tools. Like go play with
Mhm.
ChatGPT, play with
Got it.
Claude, see all of the new features that they have because companies are trying to copy them.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Shelly, and it's my second semester in the IXD program. I'm not gonna lie, I did a little bit of stalking into your path, and I'm curious how like your interest in work and like ethical UX design and video games and like that research work really like, because I'm really interested in being a UX researcher, and I put that first before like being a designer. So I'm curious like what your experience like doing that and sort of like pursuing those interests, how that played out when you were applying for jobs.
Um, so my interest actually stems from I just like video games in general. And I think Dark Patterns was very trendy during that year's Kai. So I was drawn towards the topic of how do dark patterns exhibit within the video game industry. Also, before I joined Bloomberg, I was very heavily considering joining that industry, but I ended up turning down an offer to come into finance. So I guess that's a little bit of a reasoning why I chose that research path. How does that impact my job? I believe by the time I finished writing that research, I was already at Bloomberg, but I did talk briefly about it during my interview process, I think, if I recall. Sorry, I'm losing track of time, but the general like a lot of companies don't care about ethics, to be very frank, but the general consensus is that like if you care about your user's experience, it's a very good thing. So it was a positive reaction within an interview space to talk about I care so much about my user's experience that I'm concerned about companies' ethics when they're designing interfaces. And normally, like dark patterns don't exhibit in professional like applications like this, more so in like a leisure space. That's where it's more frequently exhibited. But regardless, I spoke about it during a lot of my interviews, and I think people received it well that I'm willing to do research in a topic that's almost controversial because naturally companies benefit from dark patterns. There's a lot of money to be gained, attention to be gained, things like that, users to be gained. But at the end of the day, we care more about the user's health as, I guess, empathetic people. So um, I think no harm, no loss in talking about it during interviews, but also I don't think it would have been a good idea for me to spend too much time talking about something that wasn't like directly related to something that could transition into a role, you know? Like, unless I was applying for an ethical designer position, I wouldn't want to spend too much time talking about something like that during an interview. But I do commend you going into research. I think that's a great thing. And most companies now are offering independent researcher positions, so you won't have to do design if you don't want to. Yeah.
Oh, thank God, that's such great news. But no, that's really helpful because I feel like I did like my whole paper last semester on like ethical UX design in corporate settings, and I was
Mhm.
like, man, I'm like way too aware to like be conscious of all the decisions I have to make. But no, this is really helpful. And I locked in on when you were talking about your work at Bloomberg. You did some like diary studies and some field studies. So I really love qualitative UX research. And so that's like really helpful to know that that's still like a thing because I feel like a lot of people really emphasize on the quantitative stuff. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming today and just like talking about your experience. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's actually a really good call out, the differentiation between the qualitative and quantitative research. And I don't think any project should exist without both of them. Like you need both to create a balanced product and actually evaluate the performance of it. A lot of companies do kind of ignore that qualitative aspect, but Bloomberg as a type concierge type of company, they really care about what the users say because the users are paying this much money for their yearly subscription to this platform. So we should really care about how they're feeling. There's literally a hotline for them to call whenever they're having an issue. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's hard for me to imagine because I just feel like the larger part of this job is really trying to get people on board. Like, yes, obviously product people care about the users, but even trying to like convince stakeholders that like I promise you I talk to these people and they really said these things.
Hmm.
And even that sometimes like doesn't work is my fear. So I don't know, like I understand that Bloomberg really cares about that stuff, but I'm curious if you've ever really felt that kind of friction even in a company that really emphasizes that.
Yeah, there's always going to be a spectrum of people who openly listen and people who are reluctant to. One of the best ways to convey that kind of evidence is direct quotes. Here's what this specific person said. Even if you need to anonymize it, do it in a way that still conveys that this was an individual person who had this type of a reaction. And then the next thing I love doing is when I'm presenting research is to actually show video clips. Show that person saying this thing so that you believe it. It didn't come from my mouth. It came from your user's mouth.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think I'm gonna have to get more practice into doing that. I find it interesting to hear like you being as an interaction designer having so much in the race. Like I love that. I really, really do, which puts me in a position of like, do I position myself as a UX researcher or someone who is research focused and also can design things? I don't know. It's a weird spot.
Yeah, I think it actually kind of depends on the type of company that you are intending to apply to, because some companies will have a bit of flexibility in the gamut of the work that you do. Like within at least my company specifically, while there are these individual role distinctions, let's say I wanted to create design system components, nobody's going to sit down their foot and tell me, no, you cannot do that. You cannot work with our VX team to do that. Let's say I wanted to conduct a research study on my own and talk to clients, the researcher is not going to barricade me, right? But other companies, they might have very strong guidelines as to this is your lane as a UX designer. So that's going to be basically you talking during the interview and understanding, here are my interests. What could I be potentially working on? What would you allow me to?
No, this is awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Any more questions?
Can I ask another question since no one else asked the questions? I was like clearing the floor for other people, but I have one more question. You did mention that you were initially like interested in the video game space, but then you ultimately chose to work at Bloomberg in a fintech space. Like, why did you like what was going on through your mind when you had the two offers? And like
Mhm.
what was like in your consideration on like how you picked that? Because I'm also in a position of like which industry path do I want to go into? Like one that I want to like actually have a passion for or one that I feel like has better growth. So I'm curious like
Mhm.
what your thought process was with those decisions.
Yeah, I think it was mainly two factors that was pushing me. One was, how is my quality of life going to be? And I know that working within the video game industry can be very tough, especially as a woman.
Hmm.
That was one thing that was deterring me. Another thing was, after being in e-commerce, I really wanted to be my next position to be an opportunity for me to learn something new. I wanted to be challenged and actually feel like engaged during my day-to-day work, because I was bored solving problems that were already well solved within e-commerce. Like, we know how to add to your shopping cart. We already know how to convince the user to add something else when they're about to check out. But I think finance was more of a stimulating industry for me at that time because I didn't know enough about it. It was an opportunity for me to not only be challenged to like, propel and learn my UX skills and actually practice them, but also learn about this whole new industry that I know nothing about. Maybe in the future I will transition into video games and learn more about how it is to be a woman there, but I think this was what was going to be more exciting for me at the time. But your point about growth is also important. Which industry serves more career growth? And I definitely think being in the tech space is important at this time, given the way that things are progressing. So, but that's also where the most job openings are right now.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
we're almost at time. Any last questions? Anyone?
Yeah, if anyone is shy, I'm happy to answer your questions offline as well. No issues.
Okay, looks like I think we're all good. Thank you so much for your time today. It was super insightful, and thank you so much for taking all the time to answer all the questions. And yeah, if you're okay with it, like, maybe sharing your any contact details, if anyone wants to reach out to you, then I can just like email everyone with that if that works.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm happy to provide that to you and you can forward it along. Any questions, happy to answer. If you want to set up time to talk individually, I'm also happy to do that.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.